Thank you, everybody. Good evening. My name is Councillor Helen Green, and I'd like to welcome members of the public, colleagues and officers to this meeting. I'm chairing tonight's meeting, and to manage the business as efficiently as possible, I will invite people to speak one at a time to ensure their contributions are properly heard. Therefore, please do not speak unless invited to do so by me. Thank you in advance. On the fire evacuation procedure, on hearing the fire alarm, please leave the building immediately using the nearest available exits. Do not, under any circumstances, use the lift. The assembly point is in the area in the Civic Office car park next to the roundabout. You should not attempt to re-enter the building until it's known to be safe. Please ensure that all mobile phones are switched off or on silent. Members of the committee, visiting members and members of the public, please be aware that our planning committee meetings are always webcast live, and so any contribution you make will be recorded and broadcast. Please remember to use your microphone when speaking and to turn it off when you have finished. This is very important for the webcast because the camera will move to the next speaker. You need only press the button once each time to turn it on and off. Thank you. Item 1 is membership. I have Councillor Giorgio substituted for Councillor Smith and Councillor Richards substituted for Councillor Hadley. Following full council last night, we now have a recorded vote and we will have roll call vote. And at the end of the presentations, each member of the committee will be asked how they wish to vote. Visiting members and community advocates, I thank you for being present. Please make sure you alert me when you are going to leave and re-enter the meeting so it can be recorded. Officers have tabled papers detailing additional information that have been received in relation to the applications to be considered tonight. Copies have been circulated to members and made available to members of the public. And do all committee members have a copy? And are there any apologies? I welcome Councillor Myers and Councillor Shah. Item 3 are declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in connection with this evening's agenda? Councillor Morris.
Yes, on applications that are listed as 5C and 5D, I have an interest in both those applications and will leave the chamber once the discussion starts.
Thank you very much. Item 4, minutes. The minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of December are included in the agenda papers. Can these minutes be confirmed as a true record and signed after the meeting? Thank you. Item 5 of the agenda are planning applications. As the papers for this meeting were published and provided to members of the committee 5 working days in advance, and a meeting to enable members to clarify technical points has been held, I'll proceed on the basis that members are well informed about the application before us, having received and read the reports. For each application, it's custom and practice at Hertsmere for one member of the public to be permitted to speak against an application and one member of the public to speak in support. Where there are 2 speakers for an application, the person wishing to speak against will go first. Councillors who are not members of the committee may also speak in their role as a community advocate or on behalf of residents if they've registered. And I have tonight Councillor Myers for item 5A and Councillor Shah for item 5B. Members, may I remind you that any request for an amendment, deferral or refusal must take into consideration the clear planning planning material matters consideration for the minutes. We are going to have item 5A second tonight because it is a large development and presentation. And so I'm going to start with item 5B, which is 22/1906/FUL, land on Bridgewater Way adjacent to 7 Bridgewater Way, and Officer William has an update for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So, yes, I'll just read the salient points from the planning update sheet, which is to do with the parking provision. So, I'll just read from the update sheet itself. So, following the publication of the Planning Committee agenda, it has been identified that there is inaccuracy in the information that's presented in terms of the proposed parking provision. Following the consideration of the submitted transport statement and recent addendum, the Planning Committee report had identified that the proposal was policy compliant in terms of the proposed number of parking spaces. However, further investigation has been made into the ownership of the front off-street parking bays towards the front of the site, which has resulted in confirmation being made that the front off-street parking bays are not within the ownership of the applicant. As such, given that the front parking bays are not within the ownership of the applicant, then these front parking bays cannot be included as part of the proposed parking provision as part of this proposed development. And it is only the parking bays being provided within the basement level car park which are to be provided. So in order to accurately reflect the correct proposed parking arrangement for this scheme, and to give this issue an appropriate weighting in terms of the wider consideration of the merits of this scheme, it is proposed to amend the parking section within the Planning Committee report in order to clearly show the proposed parking arrangements, following the clarification of further information being support and supplied by the applicant. Just a quick response to a member query at the planning technical meeting. Officers can confirm that the proposal currently has no visitor parking or disability user parking bays. Just one very quick point to make is that there is additional information that we have requested from the agent in terms of various elevations, plans, showing separation distances and the rest. But we will show that to members at a later committee date as part of the planning presentation. So on the basis of this parking situation, on the next page, under the recommendation, I'll read you the recommendation. Officers therefore propose that this application is deferred on all grounds in order to allow for proposed amendments and additional information to be provided. And therefore, application 22/1906 FUL, London Bridgewater Way, adjacent to number 7 Bridgewater Way in Bushy, is proposed to members to be deferred at a later date on all grounds.
Thank you very much. And also thank you, members of the public and community advocates who came to hear that update. Can I have someone propose that we defer? Councillor Morris?
Yes, on the basis of the officer's recommendation, I propose that we defer as the issues that he's addressed are those that we discussed at technical briefing, and on that basis I think it would be appropriate to defer.
Thank you. And Councillor Amron to second.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Are we all agreed? Yeah, thank you. So, as I said, members of the public and Councillor Shah, thank you very much for coming this evening. I thought it was important that you hear that before you, at the beginning, so that you didn't hear the large presentation. Thank you so much. Okay. No. Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Allen, you have a question?
As a point of order, I appreciate we had to make a decision about the deferral, but obviously people have come along tonight to attend and watch the discussion, and Councillor Shah is here as well. Would it not have been possible to have made some notice of the likelihood of a deferral a little bit earlier in the day? Would that not have been possible?
No. No, I do take your point, but unfortunately that would not have been possible. Would you like? I might defer to my colleague to explain why.
Well, I think there is always considerable risk in predicting what a democratic decision is going to be. And the worst outcome would be that you decide to proceed and members of the public weren't present for that reason. I mean, those are the two choices, it seems to me. And it is unfortunate and regrettable, but nonetheless, I do think of those two options, that the better one is the one that occurred. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go on then to application 5A, which is 24/1152/OUTEI, land east of South Mimms, services St Albans Road, South Mimms, and I will ask the officers to present. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Before we proceed, I will just clarify that this application was shared between myself and my colleague, Alexia Collini, so the presentation will be shared between us as well. So this application relates to land east of South Mimms services on St Albans Road. This is the red line location plan. The development description is quite lengthy, but the part to have regard to is really at the top there. This is an outline planning application with all matters reserved, so that includes access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. And this is for a phased development for data centre, which is a use class B8, comprising up to 187,000 square metres GEA. This will include ancillary office space, as well as all the additional development listed here. Just to quickly cover outline planning permissions to remind members of what this entails. So outline planning permission allows for decision on the general principles of how a site can be developed. It's granted subject to conditions requiring the subsequent approval of one or more reserved matters, so in this case all matters are reserved. The reserved matters application must be submitted within 3 years of the outline permission being granted, and that is conditioned. The development is also conditioned to commence within 2 years of the outline permission or within 3 years of the approval of the last reserved matter, whichever is later. Information about the proposed use or uses and the amount of development proposed for each use is necessary to allow consideration of an application for outline permission. And under Article 5.3 of the Development Management Procedure Order, an application for outline permission must also indicate the area or areas where the access points for the development will be situated, even if access is a reserved matter. So we do have all of those things covered on the parameters plan that's been submitted with this application. So just to update members, there were a few updates on the update sheet. To summarise these, we had some additional neighbour comments which have been tabled. Anything that wasn't already covered in the committee report has been set out there. We did also receive additional consultee comments from HCC Ecology, and that has been addressed also. We have got the relevant conditions attached. We have also recommended a condition for species surveys. The Ramblers Association did also submit comments. These have been summarised, and the applicant provided a response, which we have summarised as well. There were some EIA clarifications, heritage clarifications, some Environment Agency related comments that we wanted to draw your attention to as well. Thames Water did request a condition which was accidentally missed, so that has been added in as well. We've clarified the maximum height parameters, the cooling proposed, the district heating and sustainability concerns that were raised, the flood risk sequential test clarifications, and then some corrections to the Section 106 planning obligations, and some minor corrections to conditions as well, which are also summarised. Following publication of the update sheet, there were some further tweaks required to conditions, mostly typos. In regard to condition 24, we've just omitted that requirement A, because essentially it would have meant that the condition couldn't be discharged for 30 years. So we've altered that to impose a 5-year period instead. And we've also received one additional objection and one additional comment in support. Again, nothing was raised that hasn't already been addressed in the committee report. So moving on to the application itself, this is the site outlined in red and some key points pointed out around the site. We have Bridgefoot House and Cottage, which are located here to the north. Bridgefoot Lodge, locally listed property here. This is South Mimms Services. Members will be familiar with Charleston Paddocks to the south, which has outline planning permission resolution to grant for 11,500 square metres of B8 logistics use. This is the M25 running to the south of the site. Dame Alice Owen's School here, and some further residential dwellings just located to the northeast here. So this is an excerpt from the planning constraints map, just to point out some key constraints. The site has been drawn to have account to the flood risk. So this blue section here is the fluvial flood risk, zones 2 and 3 from the Mimms Brook. The purple and green lines you can see around the site, these relate to public rights of way, which are all to be retained. This blue line running across the site, that denotes Bentley Heath Brook. There are no TPOs or wildlife sites within the site, but they are shown by the 2 dots here, this green zone, and then there is a local wildlife site along Wash Lane here. This section, which is just faintly visible in green, this is a woodland. It's a priority habitat, so it's proposed to be retained in its entirety and reinforced with some proposed landscaping. This grey line and the buffer shown, that is the Cadent gas pipeline and its development buffer. So this is an aerial photo showing the application site looking sort of northeast over the South Mimms Services here. This is the Charleston Paddocks site, and the application site falls just here. This is a site photo showing the view through the site from Wash Lane. This is a view of the site looking south towards the M25. You can see some overhead power lines here. The existing pylons within the site will be retained. This is a view of the site looking east towards an existing field boundary. And this is Bentley Heath Brook, which, again, as pointed out before, runs through the site and will be retained. This picture shows Dame Alice Owen's School, as you can see it from the site looking through the trees. And this is a view east from Wash Lane, showing the timber bridge that goes over the brook. And this is the Wash Lane Common local wildlife site. Moving a bit further north on Wash Lane, this is an access road, and you get a view through these mature trees of where the proposed access road would be set a fair bit behind those trees. And then further up along Swanland Road, this is a view from more or less where the proposed access road would be, and that's the rear elevation of the locally listed building. And then this is a photograph of the front elevation of the locally listed building as seen from the access track, which runs from Wash Lane and goes across this field and up towards the Grade 2 listed buildings. This is a view south, standing from that access road, looking across the site, and then a bit further along to the other end of that track from the corner here, looking back along towards the locally listed dwelling, and the access road would be coming across this track and creating a junction with that track. This is the Mimms Brook. To the north of the site is outside the site boundary. The inset photo here is the bridge that runs over that brook for pedestrians. There is a vehicular access through the brook here, and you can just see the signpost there denoting the public right-of-way that also follows through and adjacent to the brook as well. These are the Grade 2 listed buildings as seen on foot from the northern part towards the north of the site, going towards the public right-of-way, which goes towards Pottersbar. That's that public right-of-way which goes along the south of the listed buildings towards the west. This is a termination of that public right-of-way. It ends with a private driveway to the villa, with the public right-of-way going along here back towards Wash Lane. This is the proposed location of the emergency access road. Pedestrian and cycle access would also be provided via this entrance to the development for employees. And this is the other end of Bridgefoot Lane with Dugdale Hill Lane and Sawyers Lane, and the vehicular exit of Dame Alice Owens School. So moving on to the proposed parameters plan, this is the plan that is to be secured as part of the outline permission. It sets the development parameters that any reserved matters application would have to comply with. So the light pink zones are the built footprint zones, so any data center buildings would be located within that footprint. The hatched red areas are no build zones, so that would be infrastructure only, such as access roads. The lighter green buffers around the site, these are structural planting zones, a minimum 25 meters deep, which are intended to help screen the development from views of public rights of way. And then this hatched area is the retained existing woodland. I've just enlarged the maximum height parameters that we're approving. These refer to the above ordinance datum, but it translates to about 20 to 23 meters in height from the ground level. This is a proposed illustrative site plan which shows how a development could come forward within those parameters. It shows 3 data center buildings and 1 substation to the south of those buildings. It's proposed to put 2 small security buildings just circled in yellow. And again, the main access from Swanland Road and the emergency access from Bridgefoot Lane. So this application is for EIA development under the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations. And that means that a voluntary environmental statement was submitted by the applicant. The scope of this statement was agreed with officers prior to the submission, so we agreed upon the topic areas that were most likely to have significant effects. And that included landscape and visual, climate change, biodiversity, noise and vibration, and agricultural land. The ES does also address cumulative effects of this development together with other developments that may come forward or that have consent to come forward, and the significant effects are considered in the planning assessment. So the principle of development has 4 key aspects. That's the presumption in favour of sustainable development, the principle of employment development, the need for data centre infrastructure, and the appropriateness of the development in the Greenbelt, noting that the site is entirely within the Metropolitan Greenbelt. So the presumption in favour of sustainable development, paragraph 11C of the MPPF is relevant, and this states that we should approve development proposals that accord with an up-to-date development plan without delay. As stated in the committee reports, our development plan can be considered out of date where residential development is concerned because of the 5-year housing land supply, but as this is employment development, our policy is still considered to be up to date. I just want to point out that paragraph 8A of the MPPF does cover the economic objective of development, and that is to help build a strong, responsive and competitive economy by ensuring that sufficient land of the right types is available in the right places and at the right time to support growth, innovation and improved productivity, and by identifying and coordinating the provision of infrastructure. So in terms of the principle of employment development, the site is not located within a designated employment area. There are no policies in our development plan that relate specifically to data centres. And as it is outside of existing employment areas, it wouldn't be expressly supported by policy CS8 or CS10 of the core strategy. However, CS8 is still relevant as it supports development proposals in appropriate locations which attract commercial investment, maintain economic competitiveness, and provide employment opportunities for the local community. So the need for data infrastructure as another key aspect of the principle of development. Just to touch on a very high level of what is a data centre. So this quote taken from Knight Frank states that a data centre refers to a building or cluster of buildings used to house computer systems and associated components, such as telecommunications and storage systems. They're essentially the physical aspect of cloud storage and other internet functions, and they can hold sensitive personal data, medical and financial data, and they're therefore quite high security buildings. They also house information relating to communication, any systems that you use working from home, streaming, gaming, etc. Data centers do have quite particular locational requirements. They have to be located within an existing availability zone. So an availability zone is a cluster of data centers that are within 20 kilometers of each other. And essentially, if one of those data center fails, it means that there's another data center in the network that can take up its operation to reduce any downtime. They also need access to a very large power supply, 50 megawatts plus. The national grid tend to invest in providing the necessary infrastructure to deliver that power supply for data centers in these availability zones. Such as, for example, the expansion of the Elstree substation relevant to this application. They also need very high-speed internet connectivity. So this diagram here is relating to the application site in particular. So the site is shown with this red dot here. This shows the perimeter of the Hemel Hempstead availability zone. So you can see the site falls within that availability zone. This is the power supply locations. That's the Lechmore Heath expansion to the Elstree substation. And then this red line shows a high-speed fibre connection as well that the site would be connected into. So that shows the site's sort of location in proximity to all these three key aspects that are required. The applicant did carry out a full alternative sites assessment as well. We cover this in a bit more detail in the planning balance. So in terms of the need for data infrastructure, members may be aware that data infrastructure is now designated as critical national infrastructure. That was via a written ministerial statement on the 12th of September. They're in the same category as energy and water now. This statement has pointed out data infrastructure underpins essential services that are critical to the UK economy and our way of life, and will only become more vital as technologies like AI require greater data centre and cloud capacity. Data centres are also vulnerable to the effects of climate change, which is increasing the risk of environmental hazards like flooding, heat waves, and other extreme weather that can disrupt operations. And it's for that reason that they have been designated as critical national infrastructure. So in the event of any of those things happening, the government can step in to maintain the running of data centres, with them being so crucial to the everyday life in the UK. So NPPF paragraph 87, the NPPF was revised in December. And I just want to point out one of the new aspects of that, which is stressing the importance of data centres. Planning policies and decisions should recognise and address the specific locational requirements of different sectors. And that includes making provision for clusters or networks of knowledge and data-driven creative or high technology industries, and for new, expanded or upgraded facilities and infrastructure that are needed to support the growth of these industries, which specifically includes data centres and grid connections. So the evidence that we have for this site in particular, the applicant submitted a report by Knight Frank, a data centre development report, and this pointed out that as a result of the proliferation of AI and the increased use of generative AI such as ChatGPT, the demand for data storage is expected to increase 53% over the existing forecast need. The Hemel Hempstead availability zone, as part of the London availability zones, is actually expanding across Hertsmere. And it was pointed out in their report that the development site is a rare asset in that it possesses all of the attributes to develop a hyperscale data centre campus within 3 to 5 years, including a sizable confirmed power connection and fibre infrastructure running close to the site. Given the growing nature of data centre development site parameters, sites with this quantum of power are extremely rare to source in the London market, with this site falling actually in the London market as part of the Hemel Hempstead availability zone. The Council's own Southwest Herts economic study, published last year, also touches on the need for data infrastructure. It takes stock of the existing data centres that we have. There are 6 currently in Decorum. They're all significantly smaller than the application scheme. This study points out that globally and across Europe and in the UK, there's extremely rapid growth in the amount of data that's being generated and that needs to be stored. And this is expected to continue into the long term. And that data usage is currently roughly doubling every 3.5 years. There's a major shift underway from traditional enterprise data centers, so that would be a smaller scale serving one business, to co-location and hyperscale data centers, such as this one. So on this basis, officers consider that the principle of the development is acceptable. There is an established need for it. That is, of course, subject to the Greenbelt assessment and all other material considerations. So moving on to the Greenbelt assessment, as mentioned previously, the site is wholly within the Metropolitan Greenbelt. Members will be familiar with the MPPF. Inappropriate development is by definition harmful and shouldn't be approved except in very special circumstances, which will not exist unless the harm is outweighed by the other considerations. So this is in principle inappropriate development. It doesn't comply with any of the exceptions at paragraph 154. The new MPPF introduced the concept of grey belt. The grey belt is actually defined in the MPPF glossary, and it states that the grey belt comprises previously developed land and/or any other land that in either case does not contribute to any of purposes A, B, or D in paragraph 143. And then it excludes land where the application of policies relating to other areas or assets of particular importance would give reason for refusing or restricting. So it's very specifically having regarded to those 3 purposes of the Greenbelt, which are in the MPPF, and they're listed below A, B, and D. And that's to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, and to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. So in regards to this site, we have looked at the Arup Greenbelt assessment, the stage 2 assessment, which was produced as part of the material planning evidence base for the emerging local plan. The application site is located within sub-area 12. It's a particular Greenbelt parcel in that study, and the assessment essentially scores that parcel based on its performance against those purposes. And as you can see, it made a weak contribution to purpose B and scored a 0 against purposes A and D. So officers are satisfied that the application site does comprise grey belts. However, importantly, it doesn't change the weight that is afforded to Greenbelt harm, and it doesn't itself weigh in favour of the proposals. But that is common ground with the applicant that the site is grey belt. So is it still inappropriate development? Officers think that it is. MPPF paragraph 155 relates to development. Homes, commercial and other development in the Greenbelt should not be regarded as inappropriate where it would utilise grey belt land and would not fundamentally undermine the purposes taken together of the remaining Greenbelts. Ultimately, point A of this paragraph is where we think the development fails to comply. Essentially, although the site is grey belt, the Arup Greenbelt assessment determines that it makes an important contribution to the wider strategic Greenbelt, and that's because it performs quite highly against purpose C. And for that reason, when it's taken together with other parcels, it was recommended that it was not taken out of the Greenbelt. So this is why officers think that it would undermine the strategic purpose of the Greenbelt if it was developed. The applicant's view is different. They're of the view that it would not undermine the strategic Greenbelt because of the small scale of the site when compared with the size of the Greenbelt across the entire borough. but we feel that it's more a judgment of the kind of impact on greenbelt openness, and a judgment rather than just looking at the size of the site. Our independent legal advice is that our approach to that is sound, and that we do maintain that it's inappropriate, and therefore very special circumstances are still required, essentially. So moving on to landscape impacts, the landscape effects are considered in the environmental statement. The applicant submitted an LVIA and an addendum, which was both reviewed by Place Services. The site is not within an identified valued landscape. The applicant has sought to locate the development towards the western boundary of the site to limit the landscape impacts, and this was supported by Place Services. The footprint of built form in the site is approximately 45% of its total size. Some amount of cut and fill is proposed, and it's proposed to reuse that soil within the site for earth banks. So this image shown at the bottom of the slide is a view from the landscape and visual impact assessment at year 15, so that's standing on public right-of-way 40 looking south. And this is with the earth banks and the strategic landscape buffer. So you can see that whilst it does go some way in screening, you can still appreciate the built form above the tree line. And therefore it was agreed with the applicant that the effects will be inevitable and significant from delivery of the data centre, and that mitigation measures to further contain the development, it will minimise the disruption to the public using the public rights of way, and that would be beneficial, but ultimately significant effects are still going to arise. This is just to reiterate the landscape screening. The structural planting would be minimum 25 metres deep, and that is actually secured in the parameters plan. That equates to 5.4 hectares of broad-leaved woodland comprising approximately 8,640 native trees and 4,675 linear metres of mixed hedgerow. But for this reason, if I go back to the previous slide, for the reason of the significant effects that cannot be fully mitigated, officers have considered that there is landscape harm arising, and that's been considered in the planning balance.
Just moving on now to the impact of the proposed development on archaeology and heritage assets. The survey submitted alongside the application do note the presence of medieval and post-medieval remains. The geophysical survey and desk-based assessment have identified the potential for archaeological remains on the site, and based on this, HBC Archaeology have recommended conditions to secure additional archaeological field evaluation and assessment of the findings. And with regards to designated and non-designated heritage assets, the map on the left indicates the location of the two sites that have been assessed, with the purple being the Grade 2 listed buildings of the Bridgewater farmhouse and cottage, and the blue circle indicates Bridgewater Lodge, which is a non-designated heritage asset, while the blue arrow locates the bridge at Mimms Wash Lane that is a locally listed structure. It is considered to be of historic road infrastructure. However, it is confined to its immediate surrounding, and therefore it will not be affected by the development, and this has not been considered in the detailed assessment on heritage assets. The red line boundary of the application site will be approximately 134 metres from the nearest listed building. That is from the north of the site to Bridgewater farmhouse. And a heritage statement has been submitted alongside the application considering impact on designated and non-designated heritage assets. The brown hatched areas on the map indicate the conservation areas at Potter's Bar and South Mimms. This morning, an update to the South Mimms Conservation Area appraisal was published on the Council's website. This does change the boundary of the South Mimms Conservation Area, however, it is within the yellow hatch and this is reduced, therefore slightly still increasing the distance from the application site, but even in the heritage statement and from the Council's heritage advisors, it was considered that the proposal would not have an impact on the conservation area itself. Moving on to the assessment of the impact, there is existing planting along the southern boundary of Bridgewater Farmhouse and Cottage. And as mentioned earlier, additional structural planting is proposed. There will be approximately 27 metres at this location, which would increase the separation and reduce the visibility from the listed buildings. The application site, however, does contribute to the agricultural setting of the heritage assets, and it is ultimately considered that that's where the harm from the proposed development arises. It is from the change to the setting of the listed buildings rather than from impact on the buildings themselves. Place Services have concluded in their assessment that there would be mid to high range of less than substantial harm. The applicant's consultant stated very low degree of less than substantial harm. Ultimately, this is assessed against the NPPF. Paragraph 212 states, when considering the impact of a proposed development on the significance of a designated heritage asset, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation. This is irrespective of whether any potential harm amounts to substantial total loss or less than substantial harm to its significance. Paragraph 215 states that where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, including, where appropriate, securing its optimum viable use. With regards to non-designated heritage assets, paragraph 216 considers that the impact on non-designated heritage assets should be based on a balanced judgment, with having regard to the scale and harm or loss on the heritage asset. As seen in the previous slide, both Place Services and the applicant's consultant concluded that it would be less than substantial harm. The NPPF does not provide a scale for assessing less than substantial harm, and ultimately this harm is weighed against the public benefits, and this is undertaken in the planning balance. As far as the non-designated heritage assets are concerned, there will be limited indirect impact as a result of the change in the setting of the locally listed building. Moving on to the impact on visual amenity. As mentioned earlier, this is an outline application, and therefore all matters are reserved, including the appearance and layout of the development. Parameter plans have been submitted alongside illustrative material which indicate one way that the scheme can come forward. The parameter plans do secure a maximum height of the buildings to be between 20 to 23 meters. However, everything else relating to the appearance and design of the buildings rests to be determined at reserved matters stage, which would be brought back to the committee for determination, and consideration to be given to the design and layout related to proposed primary access and crossing points with a historic track, clarifications regarding access from Bridgewater Lane, designated pedestrian and cycle routes and connections to South Mimms services, accessible and usable outdoor space, extent and type of roof plants and roof plant screen to minimize visual clutter, and proposed materials, which are following on from the comments made by the Council's Urban Design Officer. In terms of the impact of the proposed development on residential amenity, the environmental statement does include a chapter on noise and vibration, which have been considered as potentially significant effects. The cumulative effects have also been considered alongside the Charleston Paddocks application. A number of effects not considered to be significant include noise and vibration from construction activities, construction and operational road traffic noise, noise affecting the site, vibration affecting the site, and vibration from operation of the proposed scheme. Noise surveys have been submitted alongside the application, and their recommendations for the design stage include high quality plant systems to reduce noise and backup generations to be tested once per month. There are conditions recommended by Environmental Health, who have reviewed the application, who expect that the noise from plant and equipment would be between 5 to 10 decibels below background noise levels, considering that the application site is in close proximity to the M25 and the A1M. Existing background noise levels are already quite high, so this is not considered that it would be difficult to achieve. The development is not within a settlement, and it is quite far away from nearby residential properties, as indicated, mainly to the north of the site. There are no residential properties over here, and anything south of the M25 would be too far to be affected by the development. The smallest separation distances, as noted in the committee report, are about 35 metres, and that is just to the access, whereas the buildings themselves will be over 100 metres away. Therefore, it is considered there will be no harms in relation to outlook, daylight, sunlight, and privacy of existing residential properties.
So moving on to the transport, parking and highways assessment. As previously mentioned, access to the site and the car parking provision is a reserved matter. However, the applicant did submit a number of documents with this application, including a transport assessment, a draft travel plan, a road safety audit at stage 1, and details of various off-site highways improvements. We did consult with National Highways, HCC Highways, Active Travel England, Transport for London, and Sullivan Buses. We've had no objections from these consultees, subject to conditions and obligations as applicable. The general location of the access points is shown again, just to reiterate that the main access would be via Swanland Road, and the Bridgewater Lane access would be limited to emergencies only. This is covered by a condition. It was expanded to also include cycle and pedestrian access at the request of HCC Highways to contribute to unlocking the site and making it accessible via alternatives to the car. We have assessed the transport impacts based on a worst case scenario, and this is looking at 200 staff being employed on the site, spread over 3 shifts daily for 24-hour coverage. This would amount to approximately 51 two-way vehicle trips in the AM and PM peak hours, and there would be quite limited HGV movements based on the proposed use. It doesn't require a lot of lorry movements to and from the site when compared to, for example, logistics use. The highways authorities are satisfied that there would be no increases in queuing and that the junctions could operate within capacity. We have imposed a condition to limit the use of the development to data centre only, not logistics, so a further grant of planning permission would be required to achieve that on site, as this would have a far greater impact on the transport on highways, and that's why we have imposed that in this case. So just to provide you with a map of the public rights of way, including the proposed improvements to those. These are intended to improve accessibility not just to the site but also around the site as well. The secondary emergency access road, as I say, would provide pedestrian and cycle access as shown there. And that would be from Potters Bar for any future employees of the site who may live or travel via Potters Bar. The public right-of-way shown by this dashed purple line, at the moment it sort of terminates around here. The applicant is proposing to extend that and connect it down here, and that would provide cycle access not just to the site but also around and connecting up with Swanland Road, so that's improving that cycle access there. This would also connect this route up with the National Cycle Route 12, which obviously has a broader impact for the public as well. HCC have also requested that this route be designated to accommodate equestrians also, which has been secured in the conditions. Some further highways improvement works are proposed. This includes a new cycle lane and a school car park. So this is a segregated contraflow cycle lane on Dugdale Hill from Bridgewater Lane, and as part of these works there would be traffic calming cushions to reduce the speed limit outside of the Dame Alice Owen School to 20 miles per hour. In order to implement this cycle lane, there would be a loss of existing drop-off parking spaces. So to mitigate for that, the applicant has proposed a new drop-off car parking area for the school, this would have significant safety benefits for staff not only accessing the site, but also for students of the school. This has been confirmed by Highways. We would point out, however, that this is subject to a separate planning permission that has been secured by condition, and obviously the final design of all Highways improvements is also subject to final agreement with County, and that has all been conditioned at their request also. In terms of bus service improvements, the applicant is proposing improvements to the existing service 398. So this map here on the top left shows the existing route and where it sort of intersects with the application site. The applicant is proposing to extend the footpath along to 2 new bus stops serving this bus route. The service would also be upgraded to half hourly on weekdays and Saturdays and hourly on Sundays, and it would also be extended to encompass the Elstree and Borehamwood railway station to improve public transport access to the site from that rail route as well. And this provides access not only to the site but to South Mimms services more broadly as well for employees of the services as well as the public. This would be secured by the Section 106 agreement, and this would total £1.5 million contribution from the applicant. They also are proposing a contribution to the local section to Potterspar of the Hertsmere Hopper bus service, and that would total £500,000. These are both secured in the current draft Section 106 agreement. So, having regard to trees and ecology, this was scoped into the environmental statement. There aren't any protected trees on site. It's not located in a conservation area. However, there are a number of mature trees on the site, including 2 with veteran characteristics. There is, as mentioned before, a mixed deciduous woodland towards the southeastern corner of the site, shown here, and that's to be retained in its entirety and then bolstered by the structural planting around it as well. And this is priority habitat, so that has been agreed with HCC Ecology. The development would result in a significant tree and hedgerow loss. There would be a loss of 40 trees and approximately 645 metres of hedgerow. So quite substantial mitigation has been proposed, and that includes 5.4 hectares of broad-leaved woodland, comprising 8,640 native trees, a further 870 scattered trees across the site as part of its landscaping scheme, and 4,645 linear metres of native hedgerow also proposed to mitigate for that hedgerow loss. We consulted the Forestry Commission due to the presence of the woodland on the site. They are not able to support or object to an application, but they do provide advice on the impact of the development, and they specifically recommended that dust from the development should be kept to a minimum and that the lighting strategy should avoid illuminating the woodland. So we have addressed that via the conditions. In terms of ecology, there are no statutory designations that cover the site itself, but within 1 kilometre of the site there are 5 non-statutory designations, and these are all local wildlife sites. 3 of those were pointed out earlier. Additional surveys were provided by the applicant in a supplementary ecology report to address protected species. The evidence of bats on the site does require mitigation in the form of new roosting features as part of the development, and this will be secured through the Landscape and Ecological Management Plan condition. A construction environmental management plan has also been conditioned, as well as this statutory biodiversity net gain condition. As noted here, the applicant is proposing in excess of the 10% net gain, so there would be above 18% for habitat, 65.5% for hedgerow, and almost 28% for watercourses. So ecology haven't raised any objection subject to conditions, and this includes conditions for even further protected species surveys as part of the reserve matters applications. So in terms of the agricultural land impacts, this is also a topic in the environmental statement. The site is currently in agricultural use, and an agricultural land classification survey was requested by Natural England, and this was submitted by the applicant, and their objection was subsequently removed on the 5th of December. And this was on the basis that the proposal would not result in a loss of over 20 hectares of best and most versatile agricultural land. So that refers to grades 1 to 3A of agricultural land. And the survey confirmed that 95% of the site is grade 3B and 5% is non-agricultural. So we did consider the cumulative effects of the loss of this site together with this application referenced here. That's the land south of Potters Bar residential development between Baker Street and Barnet Lane. Because if this application were to come forward, there would be a significant effect. There would be a loss of agricultural land, albeit not best and most versatile. So we have included that in the planning balance. But Natural England recommended that permission should be subject to conditions to safeguard the soil resources on site, including the provision of soil resource information in line with the DEFRA guidance. And we have secured that by condition as well.
Moving on to flood risk and drainage. The planning practice guidance sets out the parameters for a sequential test in terms of flood risk on a site, but it also states that for nationally or regionally important infrastructure, the area search to which the sequential test could be applied will be wider than the local planning authority boundary. Having regard to this, the site selection that was undertaken for the sequential test and the addendum that was submitted looked at borough-wide for potential sites, but also went beyond, looking at sites in St Albans. The sites were considered having regard to other essential infrastructure in order to make the site able to bring forward this development. This included proximity to power supply, location and proximity to dark fibre infrastructure, proximity to the Hemel Cloud availability zone, and a minimum feasible area of 20.2 hectares. The detailed assessment of these alternative sites is within the committee report, but the conclusion is that there are no alternative sites found that would be reasonably available for the proposed development and that could come forward in the time envisaged for this development, and tharefor the sequential test is considered passed. There has been consultation with the lead local flood authority, the Environment Agency, and Thames Water and Affinity Water, and no objections have been raised in terms of flood risk and drainage on the site, subject to recommended conditions that have been attached. There are 2 crossing points on the site that would require bridges to pass over the existing brooks on the site, and these have been discussed in detail with the Environment Agency with this design currently being proposed. This is subject to the final details of the application being submitted at reserved matters. In terms of air quality, contaminated land and public health, the application site is not within an air quality management area. However, noting that significant amount of power will be required, and this being provided via the national grid, and making the assumption that 144 backup diesel generators would be on site, subject to final details on the reserved matters. This is considered that the regular testing that would be required for the diesel generators would have potential impact to air quality. There are conditions recommended to limit boilers on site, to secure cycle parking, to limit vehicular emissions, to restrict the use of proposed backup generators to emergency power backup power supply, as well as testing and maintenance only. And there's also conditions recommended by Affinity Water sorry, I'll come to that in a minute. So these conditions secure the air quality impacts from the proposed development, and there's also a contribution that has been agreed of £10,000 to support development of local air quality strategy. In terms of contaminated land and public health, the Environment Agency has also noted in their response that a bespoke installation permit for the diesel generators would be required, and Environmental Health have recommended conditions to secure land contamination investigation and risk assessment and remediation scheme, and potential unidentified contamination and imported soils. Finally, in terms of the water supplies, Affinity Water has recommended the conditions that would prevent impact on the public water supply. The conditions relate to intrusive ground investigations, remediation, risk assessments, and method statements. They cover all works around groundworks, the construction phase works, surface water drainage, water efficiency, and infrastructure connections. In terms of the refuse and waste, there would be waste resulting from the construction. However, HBC Minerals and Waste have not raised an objection subject to conditions. Some information relating to waste from the construction is secured through the Construction Environmental Management Plan, and additional information is secured through the Site Waste Management Plan. At the operational stage, the waste would be collected through private arrangements, and the design of these is to be finalised at reserved matters. Finally, on climate change and sustainability, this is part of the environmental statement, and the greenhouse gas emissions from construction and operation have been considered in the environmental statement. This is the only effect likely to be significant in terms of climate change. The emissions from the proposed development are assessed up to the end of 2037. The construction phase is expected to be between 2026 and 2028, with the operation of the development expected to commence in 2029. The residual effect of greenhouse gas emissions from construction is considered to be significant and subject to mitigation from the proposals. Other impacts that have been considered by the Council's Climate Change Officer considered the built fabric of the data centre, the energy usage, and the cooling systems. And for that, there are conditions that have been recommended that relate to submission of a whole life carbon assessment at various phases of the development to understand what measures have been taken into consideration and what is taken into consideration going forward for the next phase. Submission of further details on cooling systems prior to the installation of these cooling systems on the site to prevent adverse impacts on local water supply, and consideration of the global warming potential of refrigerants to be used on the site, as well as energy and sustainability reports that would ensure that the development would comply or improve upon the power usage efficiency targets that are set out in the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact. On-site sustainability measures would include electric vehicle charging points, solar panels, and green walls where possible, all of that being subject to the final design of the proposed development.
So coming to the planning balance, looking first at the harms. As mentioned previously, this is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, which shouldn't be approved except in very special circumstances. And very special circumstances will not exist unless the harm to the Greenbelt and any other harm is clearly outweighed by other considerations. The heritage harm is also relevant to the planning balance. Significant weight is afforded to the heritage harm in recognition of the considerable importance and weight and great weight which are required by the MPPG and relevant case law. But the substantial public benefits of the scheme are considered to outweigh the heritage harm, which itself carries significant weight, and therefore officers have discharged their duty of special regard in relation to the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Area Act 1990. So to summarise the planning harms that have been identified, the Greenbelt harms listed here together carry substantial weight as well as individually. The harm to the heritage assets is afforded significant weight, as just noted. The harm to landscape character was also afforded significant weight. The loss of agricultural land was afforded limited weight, and we have also added in by the update sheet the greenhouse gas emissions at construction phase, also afforded limited weight, as these are temporary effects. The planning benefits, I'll go into a bit more detail on these in just a moment. This is summarised here as the need for data centre capacity, economic benefits, the lack of suitable alternative sites, transport improvements, green space improvements, district heating opportunity, and biodiversity net gain. So in terms of the need for data centre capacity, as already covered earlier in the presentation, data centres are designated as critical national infrastructure, and our own evidence base acknowledges the existing and fast-growing need for this infrastructure. Just to quote there from the economic study, London is currently the preeminent data location in Europe and accounts for the majority of data centre capacity in the UK. And the site forms part of the Hemel Hempstead Availability Zone, which is one of the 5 London availability zones, so the development would be contributing to that London capacity. A relevant Secretary of State appeal decision from recently in a site in Slough, dated 6th of December 2024, and this granted outline permission in the Greenbelt for a 65,000 square metre data centre, and the Secretary of State did give significant weight to the need for data centre capacity. There is an ongoing appeal in Three Rivers Council. They refused permission for a data centre that's subsequently at appeal stage and was recovered by the Secretary of State. We don't have the decision for that yet. But despite the refusal, the officers at Three Rivers did also give significant weight to the need for data centre capacity. The proposed development at 187,000 square metres is 190 and 132% larger than both of those schemes, respectively, and therefore makes a much greater contribution to this very fast-growing need. And for that reason, officers afforded this benefit substantial weight. In terms of the lack of suitable alternative sites, as touched on earlier, the applicant did submit an alternative sites assessment. The search area looked within 20 kilometres of the Hemel Hempstead Cloud Availability Zone and within 10 kilometres of the Elstree substation, which is the available power supply. And that took in Hertsmere Borough, as well as the London boroughs of Barnet, Harrow and Hillingdon, St Albans City and District Council, Three Rivers District Council and Watford Borough Council. The assessment did also apply a minimum required site area and various other relevant planning constraints as detailed in the report. It did identify, through various steps, 7 potentially suitable sites, which included the application site. All of these sites were in the green belts, and the alternative sites identified did form either higher performing green belts, had more significant planning constraints, including archaeological requirements, or are being considered for alternative uses, including the Radlett Strategic Rail Freight Interchange, the film studios, or all residential use. So consequently, the application site was found to be the most sequentially preferable. We do consider that it is possible for a wider search area to have been considered, so that has tempered the weight somewhat. However, there are no alternative sites outside of the Greenbelt identified, and therefore we afford this significant weight. The economic benefits of the scheme are notable. The NPPF suggests that significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, and it notes as well that this is particularly important where Britain can be a global leader in driving innovation. An economic benefit statement was submitted with the application confirming the construction value of this development is £3.75 billion. The construction phase employment would deliver about 500 jobs on site. The operational phase employment, once built, would deliver 200 jobs when the scheme is completed, and this would be across a range of salaries and skill levels. The GVA per annum into the local economy would be £38.5 million. And the indirect effects, there's an estimated 12,741 jobs enabled across the UK economy as a result of this development. The applicant has proposed a financial contribution towards training and employment, and that amounts to £38,500, and that's secured by the Section 106 agreement. The scale and location of the development makes it an attractive investment opportunity for quite large-scale providers. And although the precise value of the economic benefits may vary depending on the end user, we do consider that this can carry substantial weight. There's a range of other benefits as well as covered here. The transport improvements set out in detail earlier. There would be benefits to other employees of the South Mimms services and the wider public, as well as serving the application site, and therefore we've afforded this significant weight. The green space improvements include significant structural planting for natural screening, the enhancement of existing priority habitat, although the green space would not be publicly accessible, and we do consider that it shouldn't be double counted with the ecological benefits, and for that reason we've afforded it moderate weight. There is the opportunity for the development to enable a district heating network. Data centres do generate quite significant levels of heat and they require cooling on site. However, it is possible to reuse that heat. So we have attached a condition to secure a feasibility study for a district heating network, and that would essentially reuse the heat generated in residential developments, improving the sustainability of the site and reducing the need for cooling. And we've afforded this moderate weight. And then the biodiversity net gain, as stated earlier, is set out below, and this is afforded limited weight. So to conclude on the planning balance, we have the harms and the benefits set out here. Officers have determined that the harm to the green belt and any other harm arising is clearly outweighed by the other considerations. The benefits do also outweigh the harm arising due to conflict with the council's landscape policies, so that no reason for refusal on landscape alone would arise, and that very special circumstances have been demonstrated, and therefore outline planning permission should be granted. We'd just like to finish with some CGIs in relation to the visual appearance of the development, subject to reserved matters, and an aerial view of the development looking back towards South Mimms services. And this view over South Mimms services, I would just point out to members that this building here is the Charleston Paddocks development, which has not yet been built out, and the development comprises these buildings here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A very comprehensive presentation. Do members want a few minutes, or shall we hear from the community advocates before we ask questions? Should we go? E? Okay, thank you. So, please can I call Miss Ross Naylor to speak against the application? You will have 3 minutes.
My name is Ros Naylor. I was born and I have lived in this area where the application is off and on since 1964. I am also an equestrian and a walker. I hope all on the committee have read my detailed emails that I sent to each one of you prior to this meeting. One thing the planners haven't referred to is the rights of way improvement plan at all. Okay, the next thing, the buildings of 187,000 square metres and a bridge of approximately 6 metres high will dominate this landscape. Trying to hide it with vegetation will not take away the enormity of it. In the landscape and visual assessment, there are no viewpoints high enough in the valley. One viewpoint should have been from Bentley Heath, another from North Mimms Woods, and a third from Ridge Village. These structures will dominate a low open valley. Think of 2 times Heathrow Terminal 4 buildings of 98,000 square metres on that site. The landscape and visual assessments viewpoint photos give a distorted picture of how the buildings sit in the landscape. The panoramic shots, which are approximately a 14mm lens width, make the buildings look smaller in the context of the landscape. Viewpoint C and viewpoint 5 in Leighton Place's visualisation don't give the correct impression of the proposal. If you were to stand at these viewpoints, the proposed road and the bridge should be shown as coming towards you, not as shown in the photos, where the road is at 90 degrees to the viewpoint. This is not giving a true impression at all, and an independent assessment is needed. This document is misleading. The Brideway, Potters Bar 075, goes along the floor of Mimms Hall Brook, not on the riverbank as in the indicative bridge design shows. The applicant will have to apply for a public path diversion order to move it onto the riverbank as per their bridge design. So doesn't this invalidate their submitted design? However, if the submitted bridge design is correct, the headroom for the bridleway is wrong. It should be 3.7 metres, not 3.4, and the path is showing that it will flood as per the projected flooding. No one will be able to use the flooded path. It will need to be raised above the flood line, which will in turn make the correct headroom larger and make the height of the proposed design much bigger, invalidating anything submitted so far. Nothing should be proposed on good grade 3 agricultural land. In a world of sustainability, local farmland is equal to sustainable farming for the local area. The applicant has said there will be large swathes of agricultural land beside the site. I don't get it. I can't see it. I know flooding bodies have been done, but the scale of the proposed buildings on a naturally draining valley that drains towards a river which already floods still doesn't make sense. It's not the Cotswolds, but the investment of preserving this site as it is cannot be quantified in monetary terms for the benefit of mental health and well-being of all of those that enjoy it now and in the future.
Thank you very much, Madam. You've had your 3 minutes. Thank you. Please, thank you. Please, can I call Miss Mary Jasper to speak for the application? You will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to address the committee. I'm Marie Jasper from Stantec, planning consultant for the application. We have worked collaboratively with your officers over several months through pre-application, PPA and post-submission negotiations, and undertaken a public exhibition and parish council presentations in relation to the scheme. As you have heard from your officers, the UK is in need of significant levels of new data centre capacity in order to grow as a technology hub, remain competitive in a global data storage landscape, and allow businesses to decarbonise. New facilities are required to cater for both cloud demand and the growing need for AI. Last week, the government announced its commitment to supporting the increased adoption of AI to help turbocharge growth and boost living standards. This proposal will assist in meeting the needs of the modern economy by delivering much-needed critical national infrastructure and the government's AI ambitions in a landscape-led data centre campus, also delivering considerable direct and indirect economic benefits. The site is a rare asset as it is located within a cloud availability zone and possesses all the attributes to deliver a data centre campus within 3 to 5 years, including a 400 megawatt confirmed power connection and fibre infrastructure running close to the site. As your officers have explained, the application site is within the Greenbelt, but this is confirmed as poor performing Greybelt land. We have also demonstrated very special circumstances in order to outweigh any potential harm. Your officers have confirmed that very special circumstances exist, and as such, the proposal is consistent with the development plan. The proposals will deliver much-needed critical national infrastructure, a £3.75 billion investment and 500 jobs during the construction phase. Long-term economic benefits, including new jobs and investment, and a boost to economic output, estimated at £38.5 million per year, and a significant increase in business rates. Significant highway safety and connectivity improvements, including a £2 million contribution to existing bus services and the creation of a new hopper bus service. Contributions to the expansion of the Beryl Bike Scheme in Potters Bar, a new crossing to Swanland Road roundabout, speed control measures to the junction of Warrengate Lane and Swanland Road, and improvements to local footpaths and cycleways. Additionally, the scheme will achieve net zero carbon in operation and provide over 35,500 in skills and employment training. The application is made in outline to provide flexibility so that the final scheme design reflects exactly what end occupiers want and need. Your officers and statutory consultees have scrutinised and challenged elements of our planning application to ensure the proposals are presented to you in optimum form. Having concluded their professional and comprehensive assessment of the application, the scheme presented to you today is confirmed as technically justified and acceptable.
Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you.
Please, can I call Councillor Myers as Community Advocate for the application to speak? You will have up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening, colleagues. As the Councillor for Fursfield Ward, I'm here today to speak in strong support of this planning application for a data centre. While located within my ward, this site has been carefully chosen on the outskirts, positioned in a natural dip to minimise its visual and environmental impact. Let me begin by highlighting why data centres are so essential. These facilities are already a critical part of everyday lives. They underpin services as well as that we all depend on, such as banking, the NHS, TV, music streaming, online meeting platforms, social media, data storage for both personal and business use. And this is just the beginning. With the rapid advancements in AI, the demand for data centres will only grow. This application comes at a pivotal time following the government's September's announcement classifying data centres as critical national infrastructure and last week's unveiling of the AI Opportunities Action Plan. Approving this application is about ensuring Hertsmere is at the forefront of these exciting technological advancements. This project is more than just a building. It's a massive investment in Hertsmere's future, where over $4 billion investment, including $3.5 billion in construction value. It represents a significant boost to the local and national economy. It will create over 500 jobs during construction, 200 high-skilled jobs once operational, and indirectly support an estimated 13,740 jobs. This is a real opportunity to strengthen Hertsmere's position as a hub of excellence for technology and innovation, complementing our already world-renowned film and TV studios. Additionally, the financial benefits are substantial. The data centre will generate over $21 million in business rates for Hertsmere Borough Council and Hertfordshire County Council, funding vital local services. This revenue comes with minimal traffic generation compared to other potential uses for the site, making a sustainable and efficient development. The project also includes significant local infrastructure improvements. These include a new pedestrian crossing, upgraded bus stops, improved pathways and cycleways, the rollout of the successful Beryl Bike scheme, and over $2 million towards a new hopper bus service and increased services on the 398 route. The enhancements will directly benefit residents and promote sustainable transport options. In terms of environmental impact, the proposals are landscape-led, with over 9,500 new trees and a biodiversity net gain of at least 10%. This commitment to new green infrastructure demonstrates how the development has been designed to respect and enhance its surroundings. But let me address the Greenbelt concerns directly. This land has been previously promoted for residential development during local plan consultations, which would have created a far greater impact on roads and local services. The site is identified as poorly performing Greenbelt, surrounded by development on 3 sides with the A1 and the M25 nearby. Approving this application would provide a strong boundary to protect the remaining Greenbelt from future encroachment. Finally, I want to commend the officers on their phenomenal work on this report and presentation. They've ensured this application is robust, well considered and ready to deliver real benefits for Hertsmere. In conclusion, this data centre isn't just a facility, it's a gateway to a brighter, more innovative future for Hertsmere and the UK. It's about investing in our community, supporting national priorities, and positioning Hertsmere as a global leader in technology and innovation. I urge all my colleagues this evening to support this application to help secure a future that benefits everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Officers, do you have any comments before I ask members?
No, thank you.
So members, do you have any questions for officers? Councillor Morris.
I have a few questions, and I just wonder whether you'd like me to ask them all or to give everybody else a chance as we go. So maybe you'd give me some guidance on that.
Maybe one at a time to give other people the chance, because they may have similar ones to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think I really ought to congratulate officers on the quality of the presentation. It is probably one of the best that I've seen that is so complex, so thank you very much. Although I'm not sure it answers all of our questions, it gives us a bit of guidance. My first question would actually be, how far is the Dame Alice School from the development site, or at least to the nearest buildings? And I'm going to stop there under the guidance of the Chair, so just answer that question first, and I'll come back later with some others.
We're just checking that now for you. Technology supports us. We're looking at 412 metres at least. Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Hodgkin-Jones next.
Thank you. It's not so much questions, just a few comments. It is difficult because at one level there's great need for a data centre, and there's going to be considerable economic benefits to the local economy. Transport improvements in the area, particularly the 398 proposals, are all very, very good. The negatives for me are the visual harm to the green belt. Is it really very special circumstances? And it's quite an inappropriate development next to a quiet village, and there's probably going to be a lot of increased traffic congestion in Potters Bar. I'm going to sit and listen to colleagues before I comment further. Thank you.
Councillor Allen, and can I ask members to actually ask a question whilst we have the opportunity to ask questions rather than give their thoughts on the application? Councillor Allen?
Thank you. And thank you very much for that very, very detailed presentation. Thank you both for that. Lots to discuss. This is a big scheme, and there's lots of talking points. I'll only do two for now, but it is a very major development, and we need to think it through, and we need to get it right. Two questions first up. The first might be a slightly silly question, but it could be worth having the answer out loud, which is that bearing in mind that data travels at the speed of light, why does proximity matter? I suppose the answer is to do with latency. It might be worth finding out about that, just so we all hear the answer. The second one is the sequential test, not the flooding sequential test, but the assessment of alternative sites. So the logic here, an important part of the logic here is that there's nowhere else it can go. So that alternative site assessment and the discarding of the other sites, is that the developer's assessment or is it ours?
In response to your first question, we don't have the specialist knowledge to know why particularly the data centres need to be within that proximity to each other. It's something that we have taken from what was available to us in the research that we have done on data centres, both what's been provided by the applicant and what we have taken in from our own research and our own evidence base as well. So I'm not completely sure is the answer, whether it's to do with latency. But with regards to the alternative sites assessment, that was an assessment carried out by the applicant, which was put before us, and we have gone through and checked their findings. We've looked at how they've sifted through the sites, the methodology that they applied. It was kind of a step-by-step process, gradually eliminating sites based on, for example, being too small to deliver a development of this scale, or having, you know, other constraints, for example, much higher flood risk that wouldn't make it possible to develop, and that being kind of a process of elimination down to the final 7, and then they did a more detailed fine-grain analysis on those 7 sites. And we were satisfied with the findings of that assessment as officers, having gone through that. And that's why we determined that actually there aren't any other sites, and certainly not any sites outside of the Greenbelt that could deliver this development.
Councillor Giorgio.
Thank you, Councillor Green. So first of all, thank you to officers and those who have spoken this evening for giving your views. First of all, I'll probably make it clear that I'm not a regular member of planning, although as a Potters Bar Oakmere councillor and as a councillor with experience of working for a data centre company in the past, I have some understanding about what is involved in running a data centre day to day. My question is that I understand that the site is currently used as agricultural land and has been designated as low-grade greenbelt from some of the discussions that we've had today. Are you able to tell us what the site is currently used to grow and whether the current site's use includes the use of fertilisers and pesticides, and therefore would a change in use have the potential to reduce the runoff of some of these chemicals into our local streams and communities?
So yes, it's correct that the site is currently in agricultural use, and as shown by the agricultural land survey, that's not best and most versatile. Our understanding is that the farming that goes on the site it's contracted out to different farming businesses, and that they grow various crops on that site. I don't know at this exact moment in time what that crop is. But because the site's not best and most versatile, it's limited in terms of what it can grow. But we don't have access to the information, for example, what pesticides or anything that they'd be using, as it's contracted out.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Gray, then Councillor Sussman, then Councillor Morris again. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for a wonderful and detailed presentation. I've found myself learning over the last few weeks a lot more about data centres and how they work than I ever thought possible. I was interested in my colleagues' comments around traffic, and I'm just wondering, through the multitude of slides that you've shown us on the screen there, can you just go back to the kind of traffic movements that I think you broke down into AM and kind of PM numbers? Kind of looking, hang on, you have to bear with. Yes, around 51 trips in the AM and the PM peak hours. Yes, fantastic. It's quite interesting to hear that the concerns around possible traffic problems around South Mimms and Potters Bar, when you consider that we unanimously passed Charleston Paddocks B8 warehousing only a few months ago at this committee, and that was for 11,500 square metres of warehousing. And the predictions from our traffic authority was for 84 AM movements and about 66 PM movements, with a high majority of those being HGV vehicles, because they would just be bog standard kind of warehousing. So when you look at a data centre that potentially has probably 10 times the size and traffic movements approximately, well, less than half of an 11,500 square metre standard warehousing, I don't think we can justify that there will be any traffic concerns or impacts on our road network around our area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sussman.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so there's a lot to take in with this, because unlike Councillor Giorgio, I really don't know much about data centres. I would like to thank the officers for their report, which was very educational, quite outstanding. There's a lot to like about this. I welcome that there will be improvements in the bus routes, cycle lanes. It does seem, by looking at the report, that this quite possibly is the right time and the right place. Employment, it can only enhance the local economy. I do understand and see the strong need demonstrated for data infrastructure. I particularly like the green walls. However, I just need a little bit of reassurance on a couple of things for the residents. Power cuts, noise, and also assurance about the footpaths and bridleways and the brook, about them being maintained, so the ongoing maintenance of them. Thank you. My microphone's not going off.
Okay, I will answer the point on the power cuts. I think members will have been aware of this in terms of what was discussed in the technical meeting, but kind of to reiterate those points, the supply for the data center will be from a new grid supply point that would be the extension of the existing Hillfield Lane supply point, and would be called the Letchmore Heath GSP. And alongside this, obviously this is not directly going to be affecting Potter's Bar, as the power supply will be from Elstree, but alongside this provision, there will be wider reinforcement works, specifically in upgrading the voltage of the overhead lines feeding into the new grid supply point. And this is a overall investment of 200 to 300 million pounds in order to deliver these upgrades that would otherwise not be taking place were it not to support the data center. Do you want to do the rest?
So in terms of noise, we did receive a noise impact assessment with the application. As far as it was able to carry out that assessment when it's all indicative, that was carried out by the applicant. There are already quite high background noise levels on the site due to the transport infrastructure and the uses at the South Mimms services, but the noise impacts have been assessed, and we did have comments back from environmental health. Because of the distance to nearby sensitive receptors, as previously mentioned with Dame Alice Owen's school being approximately 400 metres away, and the residential properties being a fair distance from the buildings, they were satisfied that there wouldn't be any significant impact on local residents. Nonetheless, we have imposed a number of conditions to limit and control noise levels to do with the backup generators and the plant and things like that. So that has all been considered and conditioned appropriately by environmental health. In terms of the footpaths and bridleways, these were sort of discussed at quite great lengths with Hertfordshire County Council Public Right-of-Way team. As shown on, I believe it's this in the next slide, there are quite significant upgrades proposed. In terms of the maintenance, obviously anything that's within the applicant's ownership would be maintained by them, but otherwise public rights-of-way are maintainable at public expense. The bridleway that goes underneath the bridge, the applicant has considered the design with it being either in the brook or adjacent to the brook. So both possibilities have been considered in maintaining the access along that public right-of-way, and to make sure that it's not stopped up or diverted. If they had wanted to do that, they would have to speak to county about doing that and secure the right consents to do so. So we have quite a lot of conditions imposed, many of which were requested by the county council. And these include public right-of-way improvement plans. All of the things that we have at the moment are indicative and would be secured through those conditions and at reserve matters stage. But as I say, the design is all subject to final agreement with county, but they already have had a significant involvement in the discussions to date.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. You've made reference during your presentation to the height being sort of 20 to 23 metres. What it is difficult to understand is how this relates to the topography of the land. You did show a CGI at one point, that sort of appears to be across the valley, but I just not sure or not clear how, that's probably what, and there was actually another one that gives the impression that you see a lot less than you can see there. And I'm just trying to understand whether the site is lower than the surrounding land, appreciably lower than the surrounding land, or that, yes, that one. That looks like it's sort of almost invisible, and I'm not quite sure which one to believe.
So this image is taken from the landscape and visual impact assessment, and that looks at the effects on the ground from eye level. Obviously, the CGIs are taken from much higher sort of drone photography, so you're not going to see that view unless you were higher up in the sky. So the LVIA is actually looking at visual impacts from receptors on the ground, various different footpaths. So this is, if you like, a more accurate representation of what you would see as a person experiencing the site. So that's what I would say about that. In terms of the topography, the topography across the site is varied. Towards the, I'll just pop to the second slide, towards the northern part of the site, the ground does sit a little bit lower, which allows any buildings on that part of the site to be kind of set a bit more into the landscape. So that has been considered by the applicant in where they put the built form parameters. There would also be a limited degree of cut and fill as well, as previously mentioned. So topography was considered in the development parameters. But we would see a bit more detail on that at the design reserve matters, where we'd get things like site sections to see exactly how the levels are being changed. So topography was relevant to the parameters and would, to a degree, help conceal some of the built form.
Thank you, that's very helpful. With that image, are you able to give us any indication how far that actually is from the site?
That particular viewpoint is, I can show you on this map, it is about here, I believe. It is in close proximity to the listed building, and that is also the viewpoint that is considered in the heritage impact assessment as that being how it would be seen in proximity to the heritage assets as well. So it's about here. So it's 100 and over 120 meters, I would say, probably over.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And this is a really interesting application, and it's a really exciting application. The whole world of AI is the industrial revolution of now, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm really pleased that Hertsmere is looking to be taking an active role in this industrial revolution. You know, we've heard from community advocates, we've heard from officers, we've heard from developers about the importance of critical infrastructure that AI and cloud-based data centers provide, from things like banking applications, the protection of our NHS data, the whole working from home movement being powered by data centers. But it's not lost on me, actually, that, you know, most people probably found out about this application by looking on Facebook, which is hosted on the cloud. They were allowed to submit their comments and suggestions via our portal, which is hosted by the cloud. Our presentation that is showing on the screen is stored by Hertsmere Borough Council, which subtracts all of its business to cloud storage. In fact, the people at home watching on our webcast is being streamed over the internet, which is being provided by data centers. It's integral to all of our lives. It was really interesting today. I was really proud to lead a breakout group at Hertsmere Borough Council's first ever community conference. And the focus of my group was around safety and inclusion, both in the public space and housing. And while that formed the bulk of our discussions, we also talked about kind of how people could be included in the digital space. And it would be really interesting, obviously we're only looking at an outline application here for a data centre, but we are going to have one of the big boys coming into Hertsmere to run this centre. And we talked about how third sector organisations, charities, housing providers, social housing providers, contact and get and communicate with their residents, even us as Hertsmere Borough Council. And we all agreed that we all have lists of people who are not digitally connected and therefore we have to write to them with any kind of correspondence that we deem is necessary for them to receive. And it kind of struck us all actually at that moment that that shouldn't be the case. There is an option here working with a big developer to probably bridge that gap and actually bring skills and development to the borough, and actually, rather than just finding a workaround solution by writing to people, we could actually upskill and train our residents to make sure that they feel both confident and included in the new digital world that, let's be fair about it, isn't going away. So when the time is right, Madam Chair, I'd like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation for approval for this planning application, but I'm fully compos mentis that some other members may want to ask some more questions first.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gray. Yeah, I've got Councillor Allen and then Councillor Richards want to ask something. Thank you.
Some things I think not to worry about here. Traffic, the workforce is very small. Noise, it's next to an enormous motorway junction. But I think what we know is that it is conceded that the greenbelt and visual stroke landscape harm are substantial. So in a way, this really comes down to you have to have it somewhere, is kind of essentially the argument. I still need a bit more convincing about why it has to be here and not on a brownfield site further away. That bit I still think we haven't quite got to the bottom of. But I think the other aspect to it is scale, because you sort of wonder in these situations whether when a site becomes available and naturally they want to kind of build as much of it as they can on the site that they've acquired. So with a data set, and a lot of this really is about the scale of it, the scale of this proposal. A data centre sounds very glamorous and sexy and modern, but when you look at it, it looks like any other industrial plant. So in terms of the scale, what has determined why it is this scale, why it is this size? What's the right size for a data centre? Why is it proposed to be as large as it is in this particular application?
So the scale that's been proposed, as I say, with it being outlined, is subject to further consideration at reserve matters. It could well be that a smaller scheme comes forward, but ultimately the applicant has sought to achieve the maximum floor space that they reasonably could on the site. They have looked to deliver a hyperscale data centre to meet this need that has been established and that is continuing to grow. The scale of the buildings themselves is largely constrained by what the market needs in order to deliver a viable data center that can accommodate the number of servers and the cooling and the office space. So in terms of the heights and the footprints of the built form, would essentially just come down to what is required to deliver a hyperscale data center. Officers have not sought to reduce the development parameters because we're not of the opinion that that would reduce the harm in any meaningful way. It sort of comes down to as well with the site having the capacity that it does to deliver a scheme of this scale, if it would perhaps be underutilizing the site, if it wasn't delivering the capacity that it could and making the contribution that it could to the availability zone and the employment benefits and so on. So I hope that's answered your question. You did mention about the alternative sites assessment as well. In terms of brownfield sites, all of the sites within the search area that was established around the Hemel Hempstead availability zone, when looking at a development of this scale, there weren't any sites that were outside of the green belt. Whether there were any that were previously developed, they may have been scoped out for other planning reasons. The sites that we were left with at the end of applying all of the necessary kind of filters to those sites only left greenbelt sites that are not previously developed and that have been promoted for other uses, or that are much higher performing greenbelt than this site. And each of those sites would be subject to their own planning assessments and their own very special circumstances assessment, which could vary hugely depending on the particular context of those sites. And that's why we did determine that this was the most sequentially preferable for that reason. The site having the power connection that it has as well, from what we've learned, that securing power connections can take a very, very long time, many years, and as Alexia touched on as well, it depends on when the National Grid are able to upgrade their electricity infrastructure. So with that already happening at the Elstree substation and this expansion coming forward, it means that this site has that connection and it can be available to deliver much sooner than other sites, which was relevant to the flood risk sequential test as well. Again, finding that there were no other sites that were sequentially preferable that had lower flood risk. So those parameters that were applied essentially have shown officers to our satisfaction that there aren't any alternative sites that would be outside of the Greenbelt or that would be previously developed.
But the size is still fairly arbitrary though, isn't it?
The size is entirely up to, I suppose, what the applicant wants to bring forward. We have to assess the application on its merits, and this is the scale of development that they have chosen to apply for. As I say, we didn't see any reason why the scale should be reduced. We've taken the application on its merits and found that there are very special circumstances, whilst acknowledging that, yes, there would be greenbelt harm, absolutely, there would be landscape harm, but ultimately that the benefits that a scheme of this scale can bring, that it would outweigh those harms on the planning balance.
Councillor Richards and then Councillor Giorgio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a thought actually on the question from Councillor Aaron on scale. We have to bear in mind the difference between logistics sites, so warehouses and data centres. With a logistics site, it can, based on a footprint, it can only store so many things, so many boxes, whatever. A data centre can be made, the server racks can be made more dense. Now with that, obviously, a greater need for cooling comes in, and also likely, definitely a greater requirement for power, but it's not a like-for-like comparison between those kind of use cases. Sorry, onto my questions. I was at the same community event as Councillor Gray earlier on, and my breakout group was around environmental sustainability. One of the things we were looking at there is certainly sort of co-benefits of development that comes forward, and I know on page 148 the mention of district heating, so the district heating network. I know it's an outline application, so this could be tricky, but certainly other countries do it very well. So in Finland, for example, municipal leisure centres are heated, so the pools are heated by data centres. In West London, I think there's an example where, again, district heating, the residents benefit, near neighbours benefit directly from the existence of that data centre. So it'd be great to sort of get a little bit more assurance that that is something that can be seriously looked at. And a very brief question on the biodiversity net gain, the limited weight I see, a clarification, is that, so the numbers, so the percentage increase in biodiversity net gain looks actually quite impressive. Is the reason it's limited weight, sorry if I missed this, is that to avoid any double counting with other measures?
So to address your question, first of all, on the district heating, that was something that the applicant did offer up initially as something that could potentially be deliverable on this site, and it was something that our climate change and sustainability officer raised as something that we would definitely like to see, particularly with potential new residential developments coming forward in proximity to the site. So we did attach a condition, that's condition number 54, and that is on 54 on the update sheet, and that's to secure a feasibility study. So we've asked the applicant to show us, is it feasible to deliver a district heating network? What can you do to provide that on site? So we have secured that in the conditions. In terms of the biodiversity net gain weighting, we did give limited weights. It's the same weight that the applicant proposed. As members will be aware, it's a legal requirement for at least 10% to be delivered. Developments mostly will just deliver the 10%, some will go above. So it is a net benefit in planning terms, but ultimately we've decided to give that limited weights just because it's not sort of substantially over the already legal requirements.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Giorgio and then Councillor Rosehill.
Thank you. One of the benefits of this proposal relates to the building of a new pick-up and drop-off point for children in Dame Manor in school. This road is currently a single-track road, and speed on this road would be reduced to 20 miles per hour. As well as the other safety improvements, I've also received complaints in the past about the safety of children during school pick-ups and drop-offs from concerned headmaster. But in your opinion, what will the impact of these changes be on the safety of children being picked up and dropped off at the school?
So the plans that we have up on screen, these have been discussed in consultation with the County Council. This would obviously provide a segregated pick-up and drop-off area with a crossing as well, whereas before, as I understand it, the pick-up and drop-off was literally just along the road, which, as you say, is quite a high speed limit. So in order to put in the cycle routes, there will be traffic cushions on the road, which are going to slow down cars as they're coming down past the school and then pulling into the car park. So this is considered by the County Council to be a significant safety improvement for the children of the school, subject to, of course, the separate planning permission that would be required for this and approval of the final design.
Councillor Rosehill.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of streams of consciousness from me, I suppose. Firstly, obviously, I want to echo my colleagues in the presentation and the gratitude to you guys for a really detailed presentation, but also for the benefit of the residents that are here. We also were afforded a really strong presentation, an informative presentation from the applicant at the planning technical meeting, which for those who aren't hugely, well, not like Councillor Georgiou, who'd been involved in data centres before. Obviously, that was quite new to me. That we have a responsibility in this committee to look after our residents, especially with the Greenbelt. We're living through a government at the moment that, sorry to borrow a Trumpian phrase, but build, baby, build, which concerns me. And I think the only thing that my colleague, Councillor Maxie Allen, came across was about the scale. And obviously, you said it was dictated by the markets, that was the scale. Many of the other data centres which you've demonstrated in this presentation are a lot smaller sized. So my point was about the alternative sites and the demonstration of alternative sites. Would that completely change everything if it was a smaller site? Would that open up the opportunity for plentiful other sites that may be better in the borough? Thank you.
If it were the case that the applicant were proposing a smaller development, then in theory, yes. What they did in the alternative sites assessment, however, is they set a minimum size requirement, which is quite substantially smaller than what the site is proposed now. Because the application site is almost half covered by landscaping and suds and whatnot, they actually shrunk down the minimum size site that they could look at in order to say, well, if we didn't have as much landscaping and we just accommodated the development that we want to deliver, what sites could we fit it on? So they did make sure that they went as small as possible to scope in as many sites as they could to deliver a development of this particular scale. If they were to look at a development for a data centre of any scale, the smallest data centre, perhaps there would be smaller sites that would then become available, but that's not what is being put before us now and what we have to consider in this application.
Exactly. We have to look at what we're being given now, what might not what could be if it didn't look like it was and it wasn't where it is and all the rest of it, because otherwise we're going to go around in circles. I've got Councillor Morris and Councillor Sussman, and then, I would like, and Councillor Richards.
I think this is my last question now. I've asked enough. You made reference to the fact that obviously this is outline planning, and there's a lot more to come further on down the line. You also said that the scheme could be smaller. My question is, could it be bigger if we were minded to approve this application when it came back to us later on? What would the process or the circumstances be in reviewing an application that was at least as big as or bigger than this application?
So the outline permission secures the development parameters, which is what is set out here. It essentially sets the maximum limits for a development that could come forward at a later stage. So the buildings would have to sit within these development footprint zones shown in the light pink. It would have to meet those height requirements. It could not exceed those, and if it did, it would just be refused because it's not in compliance with the parameters. Yes, it could well be smaller. We don't set a minimum, but we do set a maximum, so it has to be within these.
Yes, I think that's important, that it couldn't be any bigger. Councillor Sussman.
Thank you, Chair. This is going to sound really bonkers. I actually sit on the leisure panel with Councillor Myers, and that's where I have some of my most strangest ideas. This heat thing, so I don't understand, obviously, the ins and outs of obviously being able to utilise the sort of heat elsewhere. And I'm sure the applicants could sell that. But I wonder if there is any merit in being able to utilise heat that they might not sell to actually give back to the community by way of heating the pools, i.e. at Fursfield, which sits in the ward, and in the borough's leisure centres, because I know that there is huge cost, really, in sort of heating pools and things, and these are such fantastic local community facilities, and I just wonder if there's anything that we can do to sort of utilise and grab that, really, which is another way for giving back to the community. Thank you.
So as mentioned previously, we do have a condition to secure a feasibility study. We could expand or specify that condition to ask them to have regard to, for example, local community facilities in that study. So at least we ask them to look at, is it possible? And we could tweak that condition if you wish.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richards, have you next? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back in the clues really in the name hyperscale. Hyperscale is a industry definition of the likes of Google, Microsoft, Amazon. They would only be interested in a data center that's of a certain size. And when I say size, again, it boils down to server racks. That's the key. You can make those, so on the same footprint, you can make them denser, but, you know, it's not likely to be small. So I'm satisfied, I think, from my perspective, that the choice of sites is somewhat limited, and bearing in mind that availability zone where you need to be, you know, within that distance. So, yeah, just wanted to come back on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else they want to ask? So, Councillor Gray, I think you...
Yes, I
had
did. I'd like
mentioned-
to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation and put it to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to second? Ooh. Councillor Sussman, thank you very much. So we'll now take a vote on accepting the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, members. In the usual way, I'm going to call your name and ask you to express how you vote with for, against or an abstention. Councillor Gray.
For.
Councillor Giorgio.
For.
Councillor Sarah Hodgson-Jones.
For.
Councillor Ajitakaza.
For.
Councillor Paul Morris.
For.
Councillor Paul Richards.
For.
Councillor Bet Rosehill.
For.
Councillor Natalie Sussman.
For.
Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Amron.
4.
Chair.
4.
That's carried, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Councillor Morris will be leaving us as we are going to discuss matters pertaining to his pecuniary interest. Would everyone like 5 minutes break? Yes, thank you very much. If you could be here in 5 minutes. Thank you very much, members of the public. Thank you very much. We will now continue with 5C 24/1597/CLP 107 Rossington Avenue, Boreham Wood, Hertfordshire. And I invite Holly to present the application.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The application site is 107 Rossington Avenue in Boreham Wood. The reason for committee determination is that the property is owned by a councillor. So this is just a location plan showing the site boundary in red. So this is a typical of lawfulness application for the following: the demolition and rebuild of the front elevation wall, the construction of a replacement front porch, a rear dormer, one front roof light, and the enlargement of the soil vent pipe to the rear of the property. This is a permitted development application which allows householders to develop their homes without requiring to submit a plan application to the local planning authority. This is just an aerial view looking north. The application site is, the application site is this one here. We have Felton Close over to the north, and we have Micklefield Way over to the west. Here are some site photos. We have the front elevation here, the existing front porch, just a view looking east, and the rear elevation. These are the existing elevations. The arrow shows where the existing front porch is, and the location of the existing soil vent pipe, which is this one here. These are the proposed elevations, which include a new roof light. The front elevation would be rebuilt, a replacement front porch, an enlarged soil vent pipe, and a rear dormer. The materials to replace those on the front elevation would match those on the rear elevation. The front porch would have a total area of 2.99 metres squared, which is less than 3 metres squared as set out under Class D. And finally, the dormer would have a volume of 27.26 metres cubed and would be set up 0.2 metres from the eaves in accordance with Class B. An assessment has been made under Class A, B, which is additions to the roof, Class C, which is the installation of the roof light, Class D, which covers porches, and Class G, which covers the enlargement of the soil vent pipe. As set out under Schedule 2, Part 1 of the GPDO, and in the dedicated report, officers consider that the proposal would be lawful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please can I call Mr. Kelvin Ip to speak for the application? Thank you, sir. You will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, chairs and councillors. We have originally split the application into two to allow design program, but actually whatever I'll be speaking is applicable to both of the applications that are coming forward. So this is a straightforward permitted development rights compliance application, but we wanted to take this opportunity to explain the design rationale. The proposal seeks to enhance the thermal performance of the dwellings by replacing the poor quality timber frame front elevation wall with a high quality brick cavity wall, matching the brickwork of the existing rear extension. Additionally, the PD compliant loft dormer will further enhance the enjoyments and functionality of the dwelling house. These upgrades will improve energy efficiency, create a more sustainable and visually cohesive property, and represent a positive enhancement for both the household and the local neighborhood. And thank you for considering this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Officer, do you have any comments before I ask members?
No, all good.
Thank you. I've just been reminded by my colleague. Do you accept the officer's recommendation that this is a lawful application? Yes. Thank you.
Members, we did commit these applications to being a recorded vote, so I'll ask you to do that. The reason I'm just making the narrow question here, which would normally be dealt with by officers taking legal advice, is this development lawful or not within the permitted development rights that we have, and the officer recommendation is. Now, as members, you could take a different view of that, but unless you have a view that the legal assessment is wrong, then you are bound to follow the officer's advice on this. So very quickly then, for that reason, running through the vote on this, can I just say, Councillor Gray, how do you vote?
That it's lawful.
Councillor Giorgio.
I agree, it's lawful.
Councillor Sarah Hodgson-Jones. Councillor Carza.
Yes, it's lawful.
Councillor Morris. Sorry, to apologise, he's not here. He's not allowed to vote, you're right, and nor can he. Councillor Richards.
Yes, lawful.
Councillor Rosehill.
Yes.
Councillor Swissman.
Yes, lawful.
Councillor Allen.
I concur.
Councillor Amron.
Yes, lawful.
And Chair.
Yes, it's lawful.
Thank you, members. That application has been disposed of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have 5D, which is 24/1573/CLP, 107 Rossington Avenue, Boreham Wood, and this will be presented by Marcus, I believe. Thank you very much, everybody. We could listen.
Thank you. I appreciate that most of what's been encompassed in this application is in my colleagues, so I'll make this succinct as possible. So this is the other certificate of lawful application for 107 Rossington Avenue, Boreham Wood, Hertfordshire. This is a certificate of lawfulness application for the demolition and rebuilding of front elevation wall and construction of replacement front porch. Just to kind of reiterate what permitted development is, allows householders to improve their homes without requiring planning permission from a local authority. Just showing the surrounding area here. Obviously the application site is there as previously mentioned. Just the same photos, looking at the front porch, the rear elevation, looking east, front elevation. My application only pertains to the front elevation, so as you can see the floor area complies with Class D. We have the buff brick replacement to match the rear, and the front elevation will be rebuilt as per the proposal. The assessment, officers have accessed the proposal under Schedule 2 Part 1 Classes A, which is extension and alterations to houses, and Class D, which is porches to houses of the General Permitted Development Order 2015. You can also see the committee report for the full assessment. The proposal would meet the criteria, and therefore officers consider the proposal to be lawful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gray, do you have a question to ask the officer?
I do indeed, Madam Chair. I have a comment more than anything, and just to thank Marcus for his phenomenal first planning application here at Hertsmere Borough Council, and to wish him every success, and looking forward to hearing far more planning applications from him in the near future. It's not the easiest of jobs sitting there looking at the road gallery facing him.
Thank you very much. Do you accept that this application is lawful? Yes, thank you. We can now vote then. Thanks.
Quickly call out.
Yes.
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 Oh, yes.
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 Full house, yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Item 6 is planning appeals. Can everyone confirm they've received their list of current planning appeals, and are they happy to note these? Item 7, any other business chair considered urgent, which there is none. Item 8, date of future meetings. Next meeting will be held Thursday the 20th of February. And thank you very much for your time tonight. I close the meeting at 20:21. Good evening.